Welcome to Ask a Deer Processor. Today we ask, hey Chuck, how do you skin a deer while using a hoist?
We've got our deer field dressed, and now we're going to begin the skinning process. And we do that by opening up the skin over the back leg. We want to try to just be underneath the skin without putting the knife into the meat. If you'll take a look at that knife that he's got there, if you notice with that knife it's straight, it's not curved up back, and that will allow you to go just underneath the skin without getting into the meat. Then we'll begin loosening the skin from the carcass, and we're using the knife to facilitate removing that skin. The goal is to keep that membrane. You see that kind of shiny membrane right there underneath the skin? We want to keep that intact. That allows us to leave all of the meat on the carcass for us to use for our food, as well as it makes it easier to keep that carcass clean, keep that meat clean, if all we do is remove the skin and leave that connective tissue on. And if you're removing the skin by hand, it's much easier for you to pull that hide and work it loose from the skin with your knife if you're just taking the hide and leaving that membrane that's just underneath the skin. In order to do that, you do have to have a sharp knife. On the inside of the back leg is a tuft of fur that's associated with the tarsal gland. The tarsal gland has secretions that come from it, most noticeably on bucks during the rut, as well as does when they're in estrus. That particular tuft of hair will have some secretions that you want to try to eliminate contaminating the meat with. You know, there's no reason to remove that tarsal gland as a part of the field dressing process, because that deer's been walking around its whole life with that tarsal gland and the meat hasn't been contaminated from it. The only way to contaminate the meat is for you to touch the tarsal gland and then the meat, or for you allow that tarsal gland to touch the meat during the skinning process. He's skinned out one leg and he's transferred that skin leg to a hook. Now he's going to skin out the other leg, which is now free. He's removed the tags. We had that carcass tag with your leg tag, which has all your confirmation numbers that you got from that, as well as, for us in our business, we have a tag that has a number on it, and that's the identification that we use for identifying that deer for each customer. You'll notice that frequently it's necessary to rinse your hands or wash your hands off when you're going from a dirty task to a not as dirty task. You'll find that it's oftentimes it's needed for you to rinse your hands off when you've got some contamination on them, whether you've touched the hide and you're now going to touch the meat, or whether you've touched some fecal material left over from field dressing, and you need to remove that from your hands before you contaminate the meat with it. So having a source of potable water and some soap is necessary part of the equipment that you'll have when you're getting ready to process your deer. Now that we've got both hind legs skin loosened from them, now we start to remove the hide from the flank area. It's very important when you're removing the hide from the flank area that you don't cut into any of the flank muscles, because doing so is going to make it much more difficult for us to skin that carcass. We particularly want to, you can see the flank muscles start to be exposed right there. We want to stop with our cutting our knife when we get to that point. Also, where the flank muscle attaches to the carcass, if you can leave that intact, it'll be much easier for you to pull that hide down over the leg and start down the side of the animal. If there's any mammary tissue there, we'll want to make sure when we're removing the hide from the carcass that we leave that mammary tissue on the carcass, and there's a fatty, that right there is the mammary tissue, and we want to make sure that we're not cutting into that, because on a doe, especially early in the season, there may be still some milk in that. We want to avoid contaminating the carcass with any of that milk. what we're getting ready to do now, since we have gotten the hide loosened over the back legs and down the flank, we're going to hook up a chain which is fastened to the floor, and we're going to pull the hide off using an overhead hoist. As the hide loose over the tail, you may have to do a little bit of knife work to cut around the anus and also to cut the bone and the cartilage up from the tail before we can continue skinning the. As we pull that hide, we are going to have to slip the skin down over the breast, down all the way to the chin. Of course, if we're going to cape out this deer for a mount, we are not going to want to slit that hide all the way to the chin. We're going to stop right in about there. That's as far as we're going to split that hide. But that's a subject for another day. If the meat begins to rip, you need to fix that with a knife. But if you've done a good job of just getting the hide and leaving that connective tissue membrane that we spoke about intact, should be able to pull that hide all the way down over the ears. Now we've got this hide all the way pulled down over the neck. We're going to now remove the head. You can do that with a knife, or you can do that with a saw. You know, just cut through the bone right there at the base of the head and complete the cut with a knife. Now that the deer is skinned, we're going to hang it back on our hook. The last thing to do is that we're going to rinse that carcass of any contamination that we might have gotten on the carcass. And the way that we skinned it, about the only place that you're going to have any contamination from skinning is where we opened up the hide over the back leg, on the flank, and down the breast. There is other contamination on the carcass from field dressing that we'll have to trim off. Our goal here in the rinsing of this carcass isn't to rinse off any of that contamination, just any loose hairs or dirt that we might have got on it when we opened up the hide. This deer was harvested using archery equipment, and you can see the entry wound right here, right behind the shoulder. Any of this area, we're going to have to remove that when we're cutting up the carcass to remove any contamination from that arrow passing through the hide, cutting through the skin and into the meat of the shoulder. And also, this particular deer has an exit wound right here, just a little farther back from the shoulder. It was pretty good broadside shot, but any contamination that would have occurred from that arrow passing through the vital organs of the deer, the heart, the lungs, we're going to trim off any of that area of contamination over when we're processing this deer.
Thanks again to Riverbend Wild Game and Sausage Company. You can learn more about Illinois Learn to Hunt at learntohuntil.com.